Hello once again and welcome to ABC24 This Week. I'm Richard Ransom and we are glad you are with us this Sunday and every Sunday at 9 a.m. and 11 p.m. as we aim to give you the real story behind the big stories. I have a great panel to talk about today's topics and we'll introduce them in a moment. But first, here's what's on our plate for today. The Tyre Nichols death investigation still dominating headlines this week, and for good reason, from the State of the Union to a slew of new lawsuits to new promises from the Shelby County DA to disturbing comments about pictures being shared by at least one officer. There is a lot to unpack this week. The Memphis mayor's race is worthy of some conversation as well. Former Mayor Willie Harrington joining an increasingly crowded field approaching almost a dozen candidates. I'll ask my panel what role they think the Nichols case and police reform in general will play in the mayor's race and how they think some candidates have responded to this major story. And finally, we'll talk about goings-on at the state capitol this week. The deadline to file bills has now passed. An astounding 1,500 were introduced. We'll talk about the crazy and the not so crazy. And in Nashville, we always know there's a little bit of crazy, for sure. Joining me here is my panel. Otis Sanford is ABC's 24 political analyst. Susan Adler Thorp is with Thorp Communications, a political consultant, and also Deidre Malone, who's a political consultant and founder of the Carter Malone Group. There we go, got it right. So let's start with another very emotional week in the Tyre Nichols case. For me, the most emotional was at the State of the Union address, which we have video of, where President Biden pointed them out in the gallery, the parents, and they stood and were honored by everybody in the chambers there. And it was just, I don't know, for me as a Memphian to watch that, it was just somewhat cathartic to see the whole nation rallying around them as they did and supporting what was an absolutely senseless death. Otis, what was your reaction?
Oh yeah, the same thing, Richard. I mean, I thought it was really a defining moment for this whole story. The fact that Tyre Nichols' death has captured the attention of the entire nation and even beyond this nation. But for the president to invite his parents to come to the State of the Union, where he gave him an opportunity to address police reform, to address and even talked about the talk.
Yes. That
was powerful because I haven't heard a president of the United States talk about the talk.
Ever.
Mm-hmm. I don't even remember. Obama may have done it when
Michael,
either
Michael Brown?
Either Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon Martin, that's correct. Yeah.
But other than that, nobody has talked about the fact that African American parents have to have that talk, especially with their boys, about what to do and what not to do. I thought that was very powerful.
Anyone else want to weigh in on?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm the mother of 2 African-American young men and a grandson, and I was so appreciative that President Biden invited them, but to just see Mrs. Wells say thank you to the body when they stood up and gave them a standing ovation, hoping that they do pass some type of legislation, the George Floyd, Police Reform Act or whatever, for her to stand up and say thank you was just so moving. Mm-hmm. It just really was, Richard.
And on Friday, we learned that their attorney, Ben Crump, is asking the United Nations to condemn what happened to Tyre Nichols. Susan, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's a big leap forward for Mr. Crump, but it's an interesting request. I'm not sure that the United Nations will weigh in on this, but it's a very symbolic move to say to the world, now we have the nation looking at Memphis and saying, condemning Tyre Nichols' death, and he's looking for the world to condemn it also. But I want to go back just to Deidre's comment and Otis' comment about the talk. Being a white woman, it really had never entered my life until I was working for Mayor H.C. Wharton years ago. Mm-hmm. And he told me that one day, and I've never forgotten it, that when his sons were 16 and driving a car, they going to school and coming home, they had to wear a coat and tie. Because if they were stopped, then just that presence of a coat and tie might help along the way. And I've never forgotten that. And that resonated so with me because I have a son, and I never had to have that talk. And it drove home the problem right right to my heart.
Susan, I remember my husband, who's a physician, was driving home one day and he was pulled over. He had his baseball cap on. And back in the day, you know, the doctors had pagers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So police pulled him over and said, so now what do you do for a living?
How dare you have a nice car? basically?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it just happens. It's reality. And I'm the daughter of a police officer. So I, you know, grew up in a home where my father, my uncle, my youngest brother are in law enforcement, or were in law enforcement. And so, you know, they would come home and tell stories. So it just, you know, it's just tragic what happened to Mr. Nichols, and this country will never forget his name.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I really do. And I want to talk about, go ahead, Otis.
Well, just to end that part of the conversation, politics aside, I was just appreciative that President Biden brought up the talk.
Yes.
Because, as Susan said, there are a lot of people who didn't know anything about what he was talking about.
That's right.
And now it can get into the public conversation, and that's a good thing.
It's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right, well, let's talk about the politics. The one politician, Steve Mulroy, the Shelby County DA, taking action this week saying he's going to investigate every single case. We'll show you the 5 officers who we've seen their pictures numerous times. Every single case that these 5 officers have been involved with, re-examining them with his judicial review unit, which is independent and something new that he started, but promising to look back and see what else there might be in their records where there might be a case, maybe certainly not of what we saw with Tyre Nichols, but any sort of excessive force. What do you think about that move?
Well, for me, I think it needs to be done, because I'm sure there are a lot of people who are asking that it be done. So I don't blame Mayoral for doing that. But beyond just looking back at all the criminal cases, you're going to see a whole lot of civil cases that continue to pop up. Some of them may be credible, some of them may not be credible. But this has opened the floodgates about police practice and whether it rises to criminal involvement or civil involvement.
Particularly the Scorpion unit, they're going over with a fine-tooth comb.
I just want to say that what DA Mulroy is doing by opening every case that any of these policemen were involved in, that's not new to the DA's office. When there have been cases in the past where police officers had committed, let's say a crime, then if I'm not mistaken, in the past, they've always opened those cases that they were involved in to check and see if they were legitimate cases.
What's different was, were they prosecuted or not by previous DAs. All right, some new information too this week. None of it pleasant to hear about the actual incident and what took place. We learned in the decertification papers for the 5 officers that they violated numerous policies and how they violated them, actually lying on the report about what happened with the video. And I say lying because the video showed that they were lying in how they responded and handled the case. We also learned that 13 officers are now being investigated, a total of 13 in addition to the 6 that we know about. And I think what was most disturbing to me was the news about Demetrius Haley, one of the 5 officers who actually, according to the police documentation, took pictures of Tyree when he was literally breaths away from dying, and sent those pictures to 4 or 5 individuals, including at least 1 civilian. It's fueling the conversation about what was really going on here. Exactly. Was this personal in some way? But still, the notion that an officer of the law would do that, I don't know how to respond. Do any of you know how to respond?
Well, what I can tell you is I remember when I was watching the video that I saw one of them take a picture. And I remember saying to my husband, wonder why he's doing that. Maybe he has to file it as a part of his report. Little did we know, he was probably sending it.
I thought the same thing, but I figured he's got a body cam on, so what does he need to take a picture for?
That's right.
But just as commentary from somebody who's been observing government for so many years, this is one of the most egregious things I have ever heard anybody in public employ. I cannot even imagine what someone is thinking, that they take a picture of someone that they have just beaten and sent it out, or even just to record on his phone, and by using his private phone at the scene was also a violation.
It's also a violation.
Yes.
Well, you know, social media, and you hear a lot of crazy sometimes on social media. Social media was out front at the outset talking about this was a personal vendetta. I didn't necessarily buy into it at that point. There were some people who tried to dismiss it, but
Including Tyree's father.
Including
that there might
Tyree's
be
father.
a girlfriend or something.
But one of the people, you mentioned the civilian was a female acquaintance. That's how it's described. Well, who is this female acquaintance? And I think now that it is out in the open, Chief Davis, somebody in authority, needs to come forward and tell us emphatically whether there was anything personal here. We need to know
I
that.
think we're going to find that out after the TBI does its investigation. I am almost 100% sure.
Well, I'm sure it'll
that
come
if
up at
there's
some
It needs to be
point.
sooner rather than later. That's all I'm saying.
We felt from the beginning, several weeks ago, that everything should be laid out at the table right away.
Right.
But, you know, when it comes to lawyers and the legal process, we're not going to find out until they're ready to tell us.
Unfortunately, I mean, to Otis's point, we're more than a month in
Yeah.
since Tyree was pronounced dead. And this city is begging to know what happened, because we don't want to believe that there was absolutely no reason at all for 5 cops to pull over a guy,
Right.
29 years old, for not reckless driving, for nothing from what we can tell,
Right.
and beat him to death.
And beat him to death.
I mean, we need to know. We may
need
not
to
like
know.
the answer, but the city needs to know.
Absolutely. we need
I think Chief Davis, though, is trying to do her due diligence to try and make sure that when she comes out and reports what actually happened, that she has all of her facts in place. All the T's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and the I's are dotted. That's
She's
what I
right,
think.
but don't forget about the legal
Yeah,
process.
exactly.
These prosecutors, they want to nail these guys
Yeah.
if that's the case, and they're not going to let anything out that might hurt their prosecution.
Yeah, okay.
We're not done talking about the Tyre Nichols case necessarily, because we want to move on now and talk about the Memphis mayor's race, because I want to hear from my panel what role do they think the Nichols case might have in the upcoming October election, as well as other developments in the mayoral contest right after this.